Hello, my name is Todd Volz. I am a ceramic artist and educator living in Boulder, Colorado. I am pleased to have been invited to participate in this Artaxis conversation on the topic of industry. No doubt, this is an incredibly broad topic, so my focus will be on my own specific interpretation of what industry means and how this has become a central theme to my ceramic work. The sculpture in the previous slide and this one, apparatus number 2 and apparatus number 5, respectively, were among the first pieces I made that engaged with this topic of industry and some of its surrounding concepts. They were also some of the first pieces I made that began to engage with the idea of using alternative materials in combination with the ceramics. Prior to this, my studio practice was very vessel-based, and the work tended to reference the natural world in terms of surface and color. I'd begun doing some experimentation building display structures for these vessels, using wood and various other materials. In the process, I was working with table saws and lathes, and using screws and bolts to hold things together. And at some point, it clicked that I was in fact more interested in the forms and surfaces of these things than the clay forms I was making at the time. Once I realized and acknowledged this, things began to connect, and the work quickly evolved into what you are seeing here with apparatus number 11 and apparatus number 6 in the previous slide. I made the connection, for example, that the principles of visual design I was teaching to my foundation students, like balance, symmetry, and repetition, seemed to be applied so readily to the mechanical forms I was drawing inspiration from, as well as the work I was making, like this piece, apparatus number 12. I saw a connection between the visual rhythms that come about from repeating forms and patterns and the physical rhythms of machines. Just as importantly, I began making personal connections, thinking, for example, about the summers of my teenage years working on a wheat farm. Formative years spent surrounded by machines and industrial processes. A lot of that time spent daydreaming amidst the weathered patinaed surfaces of grain elevators and tractors and combines. I believe it was making this connection to my own past that brought a feeling of nostalgia to the work. For me, the nostalgia was personal, but I would come to learn that the nostalgia I was feeling for farm life translated to a larger notion of nostalgia that many artists were feeling for industry. Mark Del Vecchio wrote about this in his book Postmodern Ceramics. He described how this association of industry with any feeling of nostalgia was a relatively new phenomenon, and how this led to a distinct movement in ceramics that he called post-industrialism. I identified very strongly with this characterization, and I still use this terminology when describing my work. This line of thought has continued in my work since that time, evolving as I've gained new experiences and continued developing my skills as a ceramicist. This piece, titled 3WFD-09, was one of the first pieces I made working outside of academia and in a home studio. You may have noticed that I also changed the naming system of the work at this point, and I started giving the pieces titles that were meant to reference serial numbers like a machine might have. This piece, MCLE-10, along with the previous piece, marked a decrease in the scale of the work that was a direct result of a smaller studio space. A result of this change in scale was an increase in the intricacy of detail and complexity of the work. I began to add more and more decorative elements to the work as well. This was a direct reference to the images I had seen of machines from the early parts of the Industrial Revolution that were given these unnecessary decorative elements, perhaps as a way to humanize them and to help ease their intrusion into the Romantic era. I found that to be such an interesting signifier of transition, and I've continued to incorporate more and more of this ornamentation into my work. I think it also makes for an interesting conceptual juxtaposition that all of the bolts and rivets in the sculptures are actually ornamentation as well. These things continue to be central themes to the work I am making, and as time has gone by, I found this post-industrial aesthetic to be rich in potential as a foundational element into which I'm able to interject aspects of myself, my experiences, and the narratives that I want to impart. An example of this, I've been working part-time for a small banjo factory, and this has influenced my work in various ways. In this slide, you can see some obvious formal influence, but it has also led me to consider industry from a different angle. Seeing how this small company over the years has adapted to changes in available technologies, making decisions about how to balance tradition with ease of manufacture. I've gone through a similar process, albeit on a smaller scale, with my own work, balancing an attachment to the traditional techniques like wheel throwing and slab building with more potentially time-saving techniques like slip casting, and recently with new technologies that I've been exposed to. This piece, MCFL-011 for example, is one of the first pieces in which I dipped my toe into the waters of digital design and fabrication, in this instance using 3D design software and a laser cutter to create the wooden elements of the piece. My experiences with the fabrication side of digital fabrication have remained limited. Nevertheless, the design software has impacted my practice profoundly. The potential to not only render things for the purpose of planning and visualization, but to then be able to extract templates directly from those renderings has been profound. This ability to produce templates so efficiently and to plan things more exactingly has expanded my capabilities for repetition while allowing me to maintain a balance with my desire to keep using the clay techniques that I enjoy most. This has increased my ability to plan much larger projects with more and more parts. These last 3 slides have shown in-progress shots of my most recent work in which I'm using multiple parts in combination to create a large-scale installation that references circuit boards and industrial control panels, illustrating the extent to which concepts of industry are interwoven into every aspect of the work that I'm making. With that, I would like to conclude, and thank you again to Artaxis for inviting me to participate in this conversation.